is that?
Oh, I saw it in the top left corner, and they took it down, so that was probably someone.
Okay.
I'll yell at you if we have a question.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry. Yeah, feel free to interrupt as we go. We'll make it a discussion. So, as Mike mentioned, the Epic PSG pharmacy practice is a combination of the old Epic pharmacy team and PSG that we acquired, a year or so ago. This is just some quick statistics. We've got 80 team members, 15 clinical pharmacists. We do a large number of market checks, RFPs each year, as well as audits, and these are kind of the four main segments of clients that we serve. We do provide full scope of services, so everything from the beginning that would sort of in the top left or the top part of the 12 to 1 on the clock, like procurement, contract review. We do try to require that all the contracts that we negotiate include an annual market check provision, which means that in addition to the year-over-year pricing improvements that you typically see in a 3-year PBM contract, we also negotiate the right to review that pricing each year to ensure that pricing is always fresh and doesn't get stale over the 3-year term, because things can change pretty quickly in the pharmacy world. Then once we sort of have, I'm not going to say like the basic blocking and tackling, but the foundation is the contract and the procurement, then the next phase really is the ongoing vendor management. And so, if you negotiate a really strong contract and keep your pricing up to date, that gets you pretty far down the road of managing your plan effectively. But the other piece of it then is vendor management, clinical review, and optimizing your plan. And so that's where we're able to help you throughout the year in and year out, reviewing your claims data, identifying opportunities, helping you review clinical programs and other opportunities out there to see what may or may not make sense for your population. And so, we'll bring you lots of opportunities that can reduce plan costs, and some of them you'll review and say this doesn't make sense for our population, and others will make perfect sense and be implemented. But really our role is to bring everything to you and then help you decide which ones make sense.
So just to piggyback on that,
Mm-hmm.
let's see were to consider a carved out program versus what we do now. There's more flexibility with a carved out arrangement. So it's important to have the clinicians and the pharmacists on hand, so that if we do want to tweak a formulary, which you have the ability to do based on what's going on in the population and cost control, we can do that. But we have folks like John and them to be able to really analyze the data, because they're the ones that understand. If we make a change, how is it going to impact therapy?
Right. And I think a couple other things that are different with the carve out versus carve in is that you have more control over your contract. So the terms and definitions that can really have a significant impact on how your plan actually performs. In a carve out basis, you've got more negotiating leverage, and we will help you with that to make sure that your contract is tight and has all the best in class definitions. Carve in contracts are usually lighter on specifics, fewer definitions, and so it gives the PBM more wiggle room, sort of, to, for example, to classify what you might consider to be a brand drug as a generic, or vice versa, and things like that. And you also, when you're carved out, you have complete access to your data. So when you're carved in, a lot of times the carrier / PBM is reluctant to share all your claims data, all the details behind it, with you or with your consultant. And with a carve-out arrangement, you've got complete access to data, which then helps us and helps you manage your plan tighter going forward.
Yeah, to expound on that, this is Mike. The contract thing is important, and we're gonna be talking, as was mentioned earlier, we did a kind of a reprice, and we repriced your claims against some of the PBMs we have, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, some of our PBM agreements. All of the PBM agreements that we have in place, we have a marketplace of PBMs. We have come to terms with them on the definitions of various things and what drugs are excluded and included in the various guarantees. I'll give a quick example of why that's important. You might think that a brand drug, so the definition for a brand drug is standard throughout the industry, and nothing could really be farther from the truth, unfortunately, when it comes to pricing. So our definition of a brand drug, as we have in all our contracts, is very gated, and it talks about the Medi-Span file, that's the source file, where the drug pricing and brand generic indicators come from, and we get down to several levels. So when it comes time to audit, we understand what is exactly how do we bucket these drugs into brand and generic, and that's important because if you've ever seen your pharmacy contract, you probably understand that brand drugs adjudicate at like an 18 to 19, maybe 20% discount, and generics adjudicate somewhere in probably the mid 80% discount. So the brand and generic definition isn't super tight. The PBM can take some of those heavily discounted drugs that I would consider a generic drug and put them in the brand name bucket, falsely kind of inflating their guarantees. So something like AWP minus 19 could really become AWP minus 18 pretty quickly. So it's important that definitions are very well thought out, and all of our contracts have that. So I just wanted to give a quick example, because some people look at me like, yeah, I've lobsters crawling out of my ears when I say, you have to really decide on what a brand name drug is. It's really not well defined. It has to be defined in your contract. So hopefully that was understandable.
Thanks, Mike. Yep. So Mike mentioned that we have what we call our marketplace we've pre-negotiated contracts with several PBMs. And these are the 5 PBMs that we currently have pre-negotiated contracts with. Now, we also work with pretty much every other PBM out there in the industry, so you're not limited to these. If there's an interest in going out into conducting a full RFP, we can go out certainly and do that and negotiate your contract specifically with the PBM that emerges as the winner in a RFP process. The benefit that we see from our marketplace is that we've got the contracts pre-negotiated and we have pricing pre-negotiated, so it streamlines the implementation process. We've already got established relationships and teams within each of these PBMs that are dedicated to our clients, servicing our clients. And as we mentioned before, we're always working on next year's pricing. So we've got pricing set, we're working on next year's pricing, and it's always going to improve a little bit beyond what will be in your initial contract. And with any of these PBMs, you still have the flexibility to implement clinical programs, choose formularies, you have complete flexibility on your plan design. It's just we've got these pre-negotiated terms that we're confident are best in class and will help us manage your plan going forward.
So Jack, can you talk to the difference? So there's TPAs that are using like a CVS Caremark as their PBM that's quote unquote their solution for their health plan. How does that look versus what we're offering on our marketplace arrangement?
Sure. So it will depend on the TPA, right? So each TPA out there has negotiated independently with CVS, and so they'll have a contract and pricing that they've negotiated. We've done the same work. We feel that our contract is the best in the industry. And then along with the contract and the pricing, we've negotiated to build in ongoing consulting services. So if somebody selects one of these PBMs through our marketplace, you get full access to the Epic pharmacy team, and that would start at the beginning. So implementation, we would provide full support through the implementation and contracting process, helping you decide on which programs to implement, which programs not to implement. Any pharmacy related questions that come up throughout the course of the year, whether it's vendor management issues or questions about clinical programs or a specific drug, we're here to support that. And then we use our analytics platform to analyze your claims data. So we get monthly claims feeds from all of these PBMs, and we're going to pull your data into our analytics platform along with data from all our other clients, and then our clinical pharmacists are looking through that data to identify things that seem out of the ordinary, right? And it may not be something that pops up on your plan, but we might see something that pops up on one of our other clients that seems out of the ordinary or merit further investigation. Like you may see sometimes in the news, there'll be stories about foot creams or other kind of creams that are all of a sudden being prescribed at some pharmacies, and they're $1,000 a script or something like that, and there's really no clinical value. So that might pop up somewhere else and not hit your utilization, but when we see that, we can go back and work with the PBMs to block those across like our entire block of business. So it prevents those type of things from popping up in your utilization. And then also, we're going to be providing you with periodic KPI reports and other analysis where we're going to identify opportunities. And so it'll give you the opportunity to make decisions going forward on how tightly or loosely you want to manage your plan, but we'll lay out, here's the opportunities, here's the potential savings, here's the impact to you, here's the impact to the members, and then help you kind of work through whether or not to make those plan changes. And then
so I was going to say the contract pricing, I haven't seen a TPA deal better from a CVS perspective than our deal. And our deal actually, you're going to see the results in a few minutes. Our deal actually includes all of the services you saw in that circle, right? So you get an audit every year to make sure the PBM's meeting their contractual obligations. You get a market check so your pricing is improved every year, and then you get the data and analytics powered by our 14 pharmacists that are looking through data constantly. So if you've ever had a deal with a large company like CVS, sometimes they're hard to steer, so to speak. Like you want to do something and you get nothing but a lot of kind of dead ends. With our contract, we actually have some customized editing with CVS, and a quick example that I just saw this morning was this drug called Rayos, R-A-Y-O-S. All that really is prednisone, and everyone's probably familiar with prednisone. It's been around for a long time, longer than I've been a pharmacist. And you take it a couple of times a day. Rayos is a long-acting prednisone, which doesn't make any sense. It costs $8,000 a month, where prednisone probably costs about $5 a month. So that's what our team of pharmacists are looking for, and those things happen all the time. I'm amazed by drugs like that appear that our pharmacists are finding. And I think what John was saying was, even though you might not be seeing it, our pharmacists meet on a monthly basis to talk about, hey, I'm working with Walmart, like some of the larger clients with Walmart, Southwest Airlines, etc. And one of those pharmacists may say, hey, I saw this drug, and we can apply that knowledge to clients where that hasn't been yet. So I don't want to belabor the point, because I'm sure you're pretty interested in getting to see the potential repricing, but we have a really good relationship with all of these vendors. Some of them may be new to you. Be happy to talk to you about them if you're interested in them. The three we're showing today show the best. I think we're CVS, Maxor, and Welldyne, so we'll get to that slide in just a couple minutes. But is there any questions kind of about how we would potentially deliver our pharmacy program? Again, this is just the access program. These are the five. We can work in a similar fashion, and we do in many cases with really all the other PBMs in the industry. We have experience with really just about all of them. And John, I think the next slide kind of brings you through the kind of roadmap.
Right.
So really it's just, hey, first year you're gonna get our reporting. We have some examples of that in a few minutes. We do an opportunity analysis in your data. So that means what things did we find that we think might be worth your consideration from a plan design perspective? That Raos would be a good example. I don't know that that's in your data, but if it is, we would bring that to your attention and we'd say, hey, there's one member on Raos, it's costing you 80 grand. I would be surprised if it was costing that quite that much, because prednisone is not a drug we typically take every single month forever. How would you like to handle that? Maybe do nothing, but we leave that kind of up to you. We don't force that on you at all. We show you what the disruption might look like in the savings, and then you can decide from there. And then certainly any meetings that you have with a vendor, we'd be happy to sit in on. And as the years kind of go on, 1, 2, and 3, we provide similar components. In years 2 and year 3, we add on that audit. So it's hard to audit in the previous year because it's a whole completely different PBM, but you get an audit report, and we didn't find a ton of things. We found probably $20,000 or $30,000 worth of things for our clients this year, but at least we're measuring that to make sure that what your contract says and what you're getting are synced up. That was my fast pathway here to get through that, so we can kind of move along to the start of the show.
Okay, then just a couple of quick slides on our analytics platform. So we've got more than 800 million claims that were excuse me, in our database, and as Mike mentioned, we're looking for high cost, low value drugs, fraud, waste, and abuse, all these other things across our entire block of business, and using that to ensure that we can block things before they pop up on your utilization. There's this little screenshot of one of the KPI reports that you'll get, and then just a couple case studies of things that we've found in the data where there's an opportunity to save significant money for some of our clients. So the first one, a 250 milligram pill costing $2,200, and 500 milligram is $39. So we can work with the PBMs to block the expensive version. So as we mentioned, we repriced your claims, and what we did is we took your 2021 claims data and your current contract, and we repriced those claims using your pricing for next year in the current contract compared to our marketplace pricing, and we take into account the differences in the contracts, right? So there's differences in exclusions, what's included in which guarantee rebate-wise, what's included in or excluded from discount guarantees, and run everything through the model, and we're bucketing by retail 30, retail 90, mail, specialty, brand, and generic, and then we roll everything up to see sort of what the bottom line is. And what the repricing shows is it's not a projection or a budgeting exercise, but what it shows is if we took your utilization from last year and applied the pricing that's available in our contracts, what would it look like?
So John, that's also comparing our 2023 pricing that we already have that and versus Ingenio's 2022 pricing, right?
Right, that's
So
right,
if we were to do apples to apples, we need Ingenio's updated
that's
pricing
right,
23, which is not, I don't believe that's out yet.
yep.
Okay.
And so if you look at the results of the repricing, going left to right across the top is the pricing based on your current contract, and then 3 of our pharmacy access PBMs. And if you look at the first row, ingredient cost, and compare Anthem Ingenio to CVS, you can see there's roughly a $300,000 difference between the CVS contract terms and Ingenio contract terms. There's a little bit of a difference in dispensing fees, but that's real, in the big scheme of everything, those don't really move the needle. And then there's a relatively large difference in rebates, so over $400,000 in the estimated rebates based on the guarantees in the contract. And so when you roll all that up, it's about $750,000 difference between what you have now and our 2023 marketplace pricing with CVS. Then Maxwell and Welldyne have some savings, but less than is available through CVS. So, any initial thoughts, questions?
Would that be like exclusive use of CVS pharmacies?
No, it's so CVS has their retail stores, and then they also have their PBM business, and the network that's available would be the national network. So it's 67 or 70,000 pharmacies, probably extremely similar to the list of pharmacies that are available to your members now. So Walgreens, CVS, major grocery stores, other major drugstore chains, lots of independent drugstores. And that's something that if we get to the point where you're interested in making a change, whether it's CVS or any other PBM, we can have an analysis run that would show you, are there any pharmacies that are currently being utilized by members that would not be in network in the new arrangement. And typically, we might find 2 or 3, but most of the bigger PBMs have very similar networks.
So currently you have to pay more to go to Walgreens. Would that be still the case with this plan?
Depends how you set your plan up. So there's broader networks and narrow networks. And so
This one's based on the open access CVS, right? There's no bridge
right,
in these numbers.
right.
Typically, that total ingredient costs or rebates could improve if we told CVS, hey, we're going to put you in a preferred spot.
Right, if you wanted to narrow things down, there's potential for savings, but there's then also you weigh that against impact on members.
Steve, I would assume when the new offer from Anthem comes in with Ingenio that'll narrow that gap somewhat, I would think. But
Yeah, I would hope so, right?
Yeah, and we'd be happy to measure that. Put it in the model and measure that for you if that's something that you're interested in as well. And something also to mention, and I think I mentioned it earlier, that all of the services are built in. All of the services you saw on that circle are built into this pricing, so there's no additional fees for the service. Each one of the PBMs provides the fee to us. We disclose that fee to you. It's in the $275 to $325 PMPM range, but that's already included in this analysis. So it's $751 net, $345,000 net of fees, and $381,000 net of our fees.
Does this look at like the things that we already have in place, like, the step therapy and that kind of thing?
This does not. So we, yeah, this is just a straight line item, use your exact utilization. So that stuff would be in there already, right? Your utilization would be reflective of the programs you have in place today. So I guess you could say it's kind of like, it looks at kind of like programs, because it's comparing your current utilization to the pricing we have with these three PBMs.
The net results after those programs have been taken advantage of. And the CVS contract has those programs in it. Like there's a baseline step therapy programs and
Prior authorization,
Mhm.
all of those things.
On an ongoing basis, we also with any of these, and I know we certainly can't use Maxter because we use them currently with another client. But any clinical programs that we want to implement, I mean, I'm sure that these have that type of flexibility as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, depending on the programs that you have. So Maxtor is really, so if we're talking about things like, Payer Matrix or Pay Health or any of those programs that do kind of that help fund specialty outside of the benefit. So if a member qualifies for some type of relief and they can leverage the manufacturer's dollars they have set aside for that, Maxor is super flexible. They don't care which ones of those that you use. The other two vendors, so CVS is less flexible, as you might imagine. They have their own internal program called Prudent RX. You may or may not have been exposed to that through Ingenio, today because they use CVS, but they use their own, and Welldyne actually has their version of that as well. So it's kind of in-house. So if interested, we've had the PBM run a modeling. We haven't sent this out to your claims data out to anybody, but it gets serious. I mean, it is important because you can save a lot of money with those programs depending on the specialty drugs that are being used. They each have a way to model what they think the additional savings for those programs would be if that's something that you're interested in. But this is really just a claim, kind of a strict claims reprice, so to speak. But you're right. Maxor, the reason we chose the PBMs that we did is that they're very, very flexible with us. We meet with them regularly to talk about what we find in the data and how they might make changes. I'm going to guess that they probably use some of our observations for their entire client base to strengthen their overall program, not through Epic or PSG. But we chose them because they were flexible and willing to work with us on those programs. Hope that helps.
So just from an observation standpoint, you got total ingredient costs of CVS and Maxor being pretty similar. And can you speak to the big rebate difference there, or making up a lot of difference, but inferring that CVS kind of has more of their negotiated upfront deals with these drug makers that they're getting a better rebate, and then on the flip side, maybe Maxor not quite as strong, but with the flexibility, possibly able to make up additional ground through additional programs that can be implemented.
That's a great point. So, CVS comes out strong. They have strong rebates, but before that, you're kind of stuck in their formulary with a PSG kicker, so to speak. So with our programs, we've negotiated customized programs with CVS for utilization. Because anytime you want to tinker around with utilization when it comes to really any PBM vendor, but especially the big three, which are CVS, Express Scripts, and Optum RX, they dislike doing those for various reasons. A, it's hard to keep track of customized things from their vantage point, and then B, it decreases the amount of rebates they can get. So we are 100% not chasing rebates. You should certainly get the highest rebate yield you could get, but it's really in that management of the plan. And we've actually found CVS has pretty strong agreements, as you can see here, with the manufacturers. I mean, they're the largest PBM, so AstraZeneca and the like are gonna be really incented to work with CVS, just because they have 90 million or more members, within their book of business. But that, a good example is some of those drugs we talked about that we would call non-essential. Like CVS likes to have a lot of these drugs on the formulary. An example would be something like a drug called Venovo and Duexis. You may have heard those come up in the past. All those drugs that happen to be on CVS's formulary, so we have a program to exclude them. All those drugs are like an Advil mixed with a Pepcid, right? And you can buy Advil and Pepcid, a 30-day supply of those two generic medications over the counter for under $20. The drug Venovo costs about $2,000 a month, right? So we consider that as pharmacists low value, high cost. We would recommend not having those on their formulary. It would be really difficult, likely, for you to ask Ingenio, hey, I want to take these drugs off of my formulary. They may actually take it off your formulary, but then cut your rebate guarantees by some percentage. So getting a good contract is one thing. You have to have a good contract to start from, but then you have to manage that trend line, and that's what that's what you use us for, help manage that trend line. And I can tell you, it is easier with Maxor, Welldyne, Navitus, and Capital RX than it is with CVS, but we probably have the strongest utilization management programs outside of what CVS offers within our Epic PSG book of business. So we manage it pretty tight.
So just as a conversation, button this up, I think there's potential for savings. We're still gonna update the Epic contract, the Ingenio contract, just for comparison purposes. If we ended up in a different funding arrangement that allowed us to be able to do a farm down PBM, what you're doing is you're opening up the opportunity for more controls and more management of the costs versus we're relying on a partner to do that in Anthem. So there's risk involved, there's maintenance, and there's education involved. Whichever direction we end up going, having a pharmacy team like what we have that knows this stuff in and out, what to ask and how to do it, I think would be an imperative if you were to move away from that arrangement. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
It does make sense.
I have a question, a little bit off topic and just real quick. Why didn't Capital make the grade here in terms of analysis with their new pricing that they tout that, they're not using AWP and so on?
But maybe back up, because I don't know that Amber and Brian understand traditional pricing versus some of these cost plus pharmacy programs that are being marketed out there. John or Mike, can you comment to that?
Sure. Real quick on Capital. So Capital RX uses something called NADAC pricing. I used to remember exactly what the acronym stood for, but it's basically a national pricing source that you could check the internet on. So if you want to go look at the drug ibuprofen, it's what Medicaid uses. It's actually required. Medicaid requires NADAC to be used, so they can understand what the price is. So it's a set price. So it's exact. So the pharmacist is purchasing that drug at that cost. The pharmacy is making nothing on that, right? The way they make their money is on the dispensing fee. So typically in your contract, you'll see a dispensing fee of, when you see the roll up here on the page, 26,000, 16,000. But those dispensing fees are anywhere from 30 cents to $1.20, typically with a PBM. With Capital, those are in the probably $10 plus range, right? So I didn't see the analysis for Capital. Maybe you can help me out. Sometimes that hurts the pricing when it comes to Capital RX, because they can't really control the NADAC price. That is what it is. They can maybe control a little bit of the dispensing fee depending on how they negotiate it, and then their fee is included in there as well. So the capital only gets a very, well, admin fee that's in the probably $2 range, so that's all they're making. And then they leverage, from a rebate perspective, they leverage other PBM's deals to help them with rebates. They do some of their own rebating as well, and I think the thought for them is to do a little bit more of that. But if you're a manufacturer and you're looking at Capital RX that has 750,000 lives in their book of business, and comparing them to CVS with 90 million lives in their book of business, it doesn't take a lot to imagine that the manufacturer is going to spend a little more time with CVS. That's changing. I mean, that 750,000 member number was like 350,000 in 2021, before 2021, so they're growing for sure. So they're going to have to, the manufacturers are going to have to take note of that. But we didn't show any of the ones that were very either cost money. So Navitus fits into that same mold where they're a pass-through PBM. And a pass-through PBM in Navitus's world is a little bit different than NADAC. It's not a published price they go on. They just accept the price that the pharmacy charge. So the PBM isn't making any margin on those claims. The pharmacy likely is. On those claims, it's how Navitus is different than Capital, because in Capital RX's program, the pharmacy isn't making anything on the ingredient cost, only on the dispensing fee. In Navitus, that's not so much the case. So these we call them traditional deals that CVS has. That's where you allow the PBM to take a bit of a spread. So they're taking something between what they pay the pharmacist and what you pay them, and they'll usually bet on themselves. So what I mean by that is they're going to probably show you a deal that's a little better than what they have and bet on themselves to go back and renegotiate with those pharmacies to make a spread. And that's why it's important to have that market check in there every year, right? Because we don't want them making extra revenue, so we're going to cut into that every year. So a lot of people ask, like, hey, what does PSG think about pass-through versus traditional? And I don't really have an opinion on which one's better from a financial perspective, as long as you're measuring it, A, with an audit every year, and B, you're improving your pricing every year with a market check. So however you get to your end result probably really doesn't matter too much to us as far as whether it be traditional NADAC or pass-through. It's the measurement on the back end that's important to us to make sure that the PBM is getting you what they said they were going to give you. So I'm thinking, and John, you can help me because I didn't look at the entire analysis, that Navitus, based on your utilization, Navitus and Capital didn't show as well as these others.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. I brought it up for two reasons. One is the Navitus and the Capitals are going into clients and saying, hey, we've got this new pricing model and we can do it for less, when in fact, a lot of times when you get to the bottom line, yeah, it might be a little more transparent, but the cost is still more. And the other point I want to make is to tell Amber and Brian that there is so many different ways to skin the cat and make profit in the PBM world. And having people like you in the back room taking a look at all this, which is a lot, is really important these days. Where, in years past, there weren't so many different options, there weren't so many games being played, or if they were being played, nobody knew about them. But in today's world, it's really important to have consultants on the PBM side because it's so detailed and so analytic these days that it's really important.
I agree with that. I couldn't agree more, actually. My very first client, I'm going to date myself, as a consultant, was Blockbuster Video. And I remember showing up to their office.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah. That's a long time ago, right? And they were actually profitable, and then they didn't see things like Redbox and Netflix coming. But I remember sitting there thinking with the CHRO, how do you, I work in this one little pharmacy area. How are you able to manage this PBM industry that's super technical and all the other things you have on your plate at once? It's amazing how y'all do it. So it's getting more more complicated, as we go. There's lots of different things that the PBMs could do to increase their revenue. I'll stop, I won't call them games at this point, one of my other colleagues will, but they're trying to drive revenue for their shareholders, is what I'd like to think. And it's our job to find those and root them out. So where you see CVS showing, at 11% here, and Maxor and Welldyne, and assumingly Navitus and Capital, showing a little bit less, it's likely easier to steer this battleship of Maxor, Welldyne, Capital, and Navitus from a utilization standpoint, and it's harder to steer CVS. So we really have to work with CVS to get them to do some things that they would not normally do for us. And that's likely happening in the background of many of the CVS, many of their clients. They just don't know that it's happening. But why would do access be a standard part of your formulary? We just don't even allow that, right? So those are some of the things that we bring to the table, but you're absolutely right. And it changes every day, the things that the PBMs do to drive their revenue.
You guys look at like off-label use too. I've been reading a lot about more expensive drugs being prescribed for off-label uses.
Yes, that's a great point. So as in many of our clients' cases, we'll actually we'll spot check several, especially ones that have a high propensity for off-label use, and check that particular approval, that prior authorization approval, against what their rules are. And we do that at a kind of more of a macro level to bring that to CVS to say, hey, this drug is only indicated in this disease state. This member didn't have that disease state. Why was that approved? And they may have a reason. They may have a note that we didn't have access to. But in other cases, they don't, and they have to pay the client back. So again, a little more difficult to do with CVS than Maxor and Welldyne. I think Maxor and Welldyne, because we have 14 pharmacists, that's probably more than many PBMs have. We will actually ask them for the criteria, and they could use us to strengthen up their criteria. But if you remember, there were these drugs called PCSK9 inhibitors that came out a few years ago that were cholesterol. CVS actually had two options for prior authorization. Kind of a loose option where more people get the drug, it's a less stringent criteria, and you get a higher rebate for that. And then the more stringent criteria where less people get the drug and there's a lower rebate for that. Well, I just want the criteria that the members get the right drug for their disease state. I don't really care about the rebate, right? But they did that for a little while, and it stopped because they had a call with us to ask us what we thought of the program, and that's what happened. Like, well, isn't there one criteria, like the criteria that the member would benefit from this medication, and therefore the payer should pay for it? And they stopped them. I don't think I've seen that strategy ever again, but it was kind of a window into the world of the PBM. So they're not the one paying the bill, and they would rather make nice with their pharmaceutical manufacturer friends to drive higher revenue out of them. Now, it's very possible you're getting 100% of rebates in your current contract, but it's, again, how you define that word rebate. It's not all of the revenue associated with your member base that's provided by that pharmaceutical manufacturer. There's all kinds of things that the PBMs call that. Manufacturer administrative fees and data fees and coordination fees. And they take that out of what I would consider a rebate and apply that to their revenue and give you 100% of what's left over. You can probably it gets complicated pretty fast, and it's changing every day, right? I can't see inside the room, but and it's just not just the Mike and John show. Like, so we have 80 folks within PSG. We have our pricing leader came from the company Express Scripts, so she does all of our pricing. She actually created the model that built what you're seeing on the screen here today. We have a whole